Pnawn da, croeso bawb i'r cyfarfod llawn y prynawn yma. Cyn i ni ddechrau, dwi angen nodi ychydig o bwyntiau. Mae cyfarfod llawn yn gynnelyr drwy gynhadledd fideo yn unol y rheolau sefydlog Senedd Cymru ac yn gyfystyr y thrafodion y Senedd a dibenion Deddf Llywodraeth Cymru 2006. Bydd rhai o ddarpariaethau rheol sefydlog 34 yn gymwys ar gyfer y cyfarfod yma. Mae'r rheini wedi i nodi ar eich agenda chi. A dwi eisiau atgoffa aelodau hefyd fod y rheolau sefydlog sy'n ymwneud â threfn yn y cyfarfod llawn yn berthnasol i'r cyfarfod yma, wrth gwrs. Felly'r eitem gyntaf yn agenda ni'r prynawn yma yw'r cwestiynau i'r Prif Weinidog ac mae'r cwestiwn cyntaf prynawn yma gan Aelodau.
Diolch yn fawr, Llywydd, prynawn da. A wnaeth y Prif Weinidog ddatganiad am rôl Llywodraeth Cymru yn natblygiad posibl morlyn llanw ym Mae Abertawe.
Y cwestiwn, Llywydd, ers i Lywodraeth y Dynes Unedig wrthod cefnogi'r prosiect, cefnogaeth Llywodraeth Cymru yn ariannol ac yn wleidyddol sydd wedi helpu'r tasglu lleol i gadw'r potensial ar gyfer datblygu morlyn llanw baich Abertawe yn fyw, rydym yn parhau i weithio gyda'n eraill i ddatblygu'r achos o blaid ynni'r môr yng Nghymru.
Diolch yn fawr. First Minister, the lack of decision-making on this issue is becoming a source of huge frustration locally. As you said, we know that the UK government will not invest in this project, but what is disappointingly becoming apparent is that the Welsh government has no plans to take ownership of this project either. There has been no detailed public response to the Swansea Bay City Region report of May 2019, and despite the Labour leader of Swansea Council claiming back in June 2020 that he hoped to see the Welsh Government back plans for the revised lagoon within the next few weeks, I quote, we have heard nothing. Are people in Swansea therefore right to conclude that the Welsh Government has given up on the tidal lagoon? And if not, what evidence can you provide to show that you are working towards delivering the scheme?
Well, many tens of thousands of pounds of evidence demonstrate that if it were not for the support of this Welsh Labour government, there would be no scheme at all in Swansea to take forward in any way. When the UK government stepped away from the investment that they had promised in the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon, the Welsh Government intervened to support both the local authority and other local players with the funding they needed to be able to develop the Dragon Energy Island concept. Now, I know that the Secretary of State for Wales and the Secretary of State at Bays have been having discussions with the leadership of Swansea Council about how this concept can be taken forward. Unfortunately, despite lots of warm words, there was no funding at all identified in last week's budget to be able to back up what the UK government had been suggesting was their positive interest in the new set of proposals. Now, I wrote to the Secretary of State for Wales on the 20th of October last proposing a partnership approach where the Welsh Government would be at the table alongside the UK government and local interests. The Secretary of State replied to me very quickly. It's a positive reply on the 2nd of November saying he was more than happy to meet. Unfortunately, no time has been available in the Secretary of State's diary since then for such a meeting. It was due to take place with my colleague Lee Waters, the government's lead on the Swansea Bay City deal. It's meant to happen last week on the 10th of November. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State was unable to keep that commitment. It's back in the diary for the 23rd of March, and this time let's hope that the meeting that the Secretary of State was more than happy to agree to months ago will take place, because we need the UK government to be at that table if we are to match the support that the Welsh government has provided and the local authority has provided with the help that only the UK government can bring to that table.
Susie Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd. Back in April 2019, First Minister, the Trefnydd and Finance Minister at that point confirmed the Welsh Government continued to be an enthusiastic supporter for the proposal at that time, and that funding was still on the table should a viable proposal come forward. So I'm just quoting her there. Do you think that the Dragon Island proposal is a viable one? And if so, how much money has been ring-fenced in this year's budget as a contribution towards it moving forward? Or are you in a position as a Welsh Government to say, well, actually, it may not be for Swansea, this money, it could be for other tidal projects, as hinted by the Trefnydd in later contributions on this type of question? Is it for the lagoon or not?
Well, I think the Welsh Government has been clear throughout. We are committed to tidal energy and to marine energy in Wales. The Swansea Bay tidal lagoon was obviously the front runner in all of that because it had developed its proposals and it believed it had the support of the UK government in doing so. The Charles Hendry review set up by the UK government to advise it on the possibility described it, as the member will remember, as a no regrets investment. The UK government then took 18 months to reply to the Hendry review before turning it down in June 2018. We need the UK government to come to the table, to do it in a way that would make the Dragon Energy Island project a viable proposition, because it will only be a viable proposition if it is done on a partnership basis. If that happens, the Welsh Government will be there to play our part, as we have demonstrated. So I said, if it were not for the money that we put into the development of that alternative proposition, there wouldn't be anything to discuss. But it's there because of the work that we, and of course, Swansea City Council and local players have put into it. If the UK government will back up its warm words with some actual action and some hard cash, the Welsh Government will be there too.
Mike Hedges.
Diolch, Llywydd. Our major asset in terms of renewables is the tidal movement in the Severn Estuary. It is the equivalent of hydropower and geothermal power in Iceland and hydropower in China and Brazil. Welsh Government support has never been in doubt. Will the First Minister continue to press the Westminster Government on the production of electricity via tidal lagoons, obviously starting with Swansea?
Well, Llywydd, I think Mike Hedges has just set out just why the failure of the UK government to act on this is so frustrating, and so frustrating for Wales. We have unique opportunities in Wales in marine energy, whether that is in Menai Straits, whether that is around Pembrokeshire, or whether it is with tidal lagoon technology, to capitalise on the groundbreaking work that has already been done in preparing for a demonstration project in Swansea. And of course, the Welsh Government goes on explaining to the UK Government the unique opportunities that the tidal reach of the Severn Estuary provides. Wales and the United Kingdom needs to be at the cutting edge of the global energy revolution that will be needed in years to come. We have all the natural assets to allow us to be in that position. And I very much share Mike Hedges' frustration at the failure of the UK government to recognise that potential and to act on it.
Question 2, Mark Drakeford.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the status of intergovernmental relationships between the Welsh Government and UK Government?
So the relationships continue to be too often unpredictable, ad hoc, disrupted by aggressively unilateral action by the UK government, and without the necessary underpinning of machinery for intergovernmental cooperation required to preserve the UK and enable it to prosper as a voluntary association of 4 nations.
First Minister, you'd like to blame the UK government for problems or aggression in the relationship, but shouldn't you take some responsibility? You chose to have yourself filmed saying the Prime Minister is really, really awful. How does that help bring the UK government to the table? You've concluded the UK is over. You're running candidates who support independence at the coming election. This morning, one of your ministers supported BBC Wales appointing an ex-chief executive of Plaid Cymru as its director of content. Wasn't the Secretary of State right to tell me last week that this is all about you palling up with Plaid Cymru with a view to a coalition after the election? And so long as we have devolution, we will be on a slippery slope to independence.
Well, Llywydd, the Welsh Government has time after time for a decade, under the leadership that my predecessor, Carwyn Jones, gave to this whole agenda, argued for a constitutional convention to put the United Kingdom on a footing that would allow it to prosper in the future. And that is my position and the position of my party. We believe that the United Kingdom is better off for having Wales in it, and that Wales is better off for being in the United Kingdom. There's no ambiguity at all in our position. What we lack is a UK government willing to act in a way that recognises that 20 years into devolution, that attempting to bring devolved governments to heel rather than to bring us closer together will ever be a recipe for securing the continuation of a successful United Kingdom. Time after time, both Carwyn Jones and I have urged UK ministers to enter into the serious conversations that are needed to establish intergovernmental machinery, to find independent means of resolving and avoiding disputes between the nations, to do that on the basis of a parity of participation and of respect. Instead, we face a UK government that unilaterally and aggressively takes funding, takes powers away from devolved governments across the United Kingdom, and in its everyday actions feeds the forces that will lead to the United Kingdom's breakup unless the United Kingdom government is prepared to recognise the foolishness of its approach and instead to follow the sorts of arguments and constructive proposals that the Welsh Government has consistently brought to this debate.
Nick Ramsey.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, can I ask you about positive steps that you can take in working with the UK government to make Wales a safer place for everyone? I, along with many other members and people across Wales, lit up my doorstep on Saturday evening to support the Reclaim the Streets campaign, not just to pay my respects to Wenjin, Lynn and Sarah Everard, but also to show commitment to making our communities across Wales a safer place. You've just mentioned communities. Much more action is needed now to help women and people feel safer in our communities. Can you confirm that the Welsh Government will do what it can to positively collaborate with the UK Government on this specific issue? And could you also tell us a little bit more about the steps that Welsh Government is taking to empower women and to reassure people that they are safe in communities across Wales?
Well, Llywydd, I thank Nick Ramsey for that very serious and pertinent question. And of course, the Welsh Government will act positively and constructively with other governments in the United Kingdom. Women in Wales and elsewhere in the United Kingdom must be safe and feel safe. If that's to happen in Wales, then that can only be with a combination of services that are devolved and non-devolved. If the UK government wants a constructive conversation and engagement on that issue, then of course they will find a ready partner for that here. In terms of the actions that we can take, these were set out in the statement issued earlier today by my colleague Jane Hutt, the Deputy Minister and Chief Whip, who has dedicated her whole political career to advancing the causes of women and girls here in Wales. I commend the statement to members of the Senedd. It sets out the actions that we as a Welsh Government will embark upon. And as I say, in answering Nick Ramsey, where others are willing to act with us in a genuinely collaborative fashion, then we will always be prepared to do that in the most constructive way.
Daeth Jewel.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, I cannot overemphasise how deeply I disagree with everything Mark Reckless now stands for. It seems to me that one of the main barriers to good intergovernmental relations between Wales and England is the largely defunct role of Secretary of State for Wales. The incumbent, Simon Hart, has said recently that the Welsh Government should stop fretting about their own little status in Cardiff and look at the bigger picture. Would you agree with me that the bigger picture we need to look towards before we achieve the independence that will empower us is actually to abolish the role of Welsh Secretary, seeing as his government and he are so intent on undermining the devolution that the people of Wales have voted for on no less than 14 occasions through 2 referendums and delivering pro-devolution majorities in every election since 1997.
Well, so I certainly agree with Dereth Jewel that I have no sympathy at all with what Mr. Reckless stands for or proposes. I often feel when that member is asking me questions, what he's really doing is, he's accusing me of being Welsh. And it's an accusation to which I plead guilty, of course, inside out, back to front, upside down, you name it, that's what I am. And the member, I'm afraid, Mr. Reckless will never understand that, and it leads to the misguided set of ideas that he puts in front of us. On the issue of the Secretary of State's office, I have long believed, I believe for more than a decade while there were Labour governments as well as Conservative governments, that the continued case for territorial Secretaries of State, as they are called, has diminished year by year. I think there is a case for a Whitehall ministry that takes a constructive responsibility for relationships between the nations of the United Kingdom. I think that's a proper ambition, but territorial Secretaries of State are a hangover from pre-devolution days, and as I say, I agree with Dereth Jewel that the case for them weakens all the time, and it is certainly weakened when any incumbent of that office uses the sort of belittling and demeaning language that we've seen from the Secretary of State for Wales.
Cwestiynau nawr gan arweinwyr y pleidiau, arweinydd Plaid Cymru, Adam Price.
First Minister, today we mark the very sombre anniversary of the first recorded death as a result of COVID-19 in Wales. You've talked about the need for a future public inquiry which will seek to identify lessons from the last 12 months. Do you share the view, as I do, recently expressed by Sir Mansell Aelward, that one of the clear lessons is that there was a failure to properly plan and prepare for the pandemic? Specifically, do you think that the emphasis on influenza to the exclusion of coronaviruses like SARS or MERS in the pandemic plan led to some of the early mistakes in the response? The science around a flu pandemic suggested it was very, very difficult or even futile to try and suppress community transmission once it's become endemic, which isn't the case, as we now know, with COVID. Does that explain the 2 principal mistakes early on, the failure to adopt lockdown restrictions sufficiently early and the abandonment of community test and trace, later readopted, of course?
Well, so let me thank Adam Price for drawing attention to the very sober and sombre day it is when we mark the anniversary of the first death from coronavirus here in Wales. An experience that has been repeated for far, far too many families. I was very glad today to be able to make the announcement of commemorative woodland, both North and South Wales, where families who have experienced that loss will be able to have a permanent memorial to that awful experience. Mr. Price is right as well, Llywydd, to point to the fact that pandemic planning across the United Kingdom had largely focused on influenza and the lessons that were drawn from earlier experiences of that. I think it is too early to talk of mistakes and to attributing causes to things that could have been done differently. I'm quite sure that things would have been done differently if we knew then what we know now. So that's not in any way to deny that things could have been done differently. Being able to say it was because of this or because of that, and if we'd known we'd have done something differently, I think that's much harder to be definitive. There needs to be an inquiry. That inquiry needs to be on a UK basis, otherwise it will never make sense of the experience here in Wales in a full way, and it needs to be done at a time when the system, which is still focused every single day in dealing with the very real impacts of the public health emergency, has the space it needs to be able to think about and contribute to the questions that such an inquiry will rightly raise.
Many people, First Minister, are pointed to the way in which COVID-19 has highlighted and further exacerbated existing health inequalities. The Welsh Health and Social Care Policy Forum, which draw together the leading organisations in the sector in Wales, have written to you asking you to commit to a cross-government strategy to reduce these inequalities, addressing the deeper social determinants of ill health, the poor housing, gaps in educational opportunity, and the prior pandemic of poverty that has scarred too many people in Wales for far too long. The announcement that you just referred to of the creation of a living memorial to those that have lost their lives, I think is very thoughtful and very welcome. But would it not be an even greater memorial for us to resolve together to end child hunger and poverty, to end homelessness and poor housing, and end poverty pay, beginning with key workers, as a sign of our collective determination not to go back to how things were before?
Well, Llywydd, those are also important points. I'm very glad the Social Care Forum has been hard at work on this agenda. The work of the Social Partnership Council, Llywydd, when we come to reflect on this extraordinary 12 months, I think will stand out to us. A way of working here in Wales that genuinely brings all interested parties around the table together. It's met every fortnight. It set up the Social Care Forum as part of those arrangements, and I think they will be shown to have stood us in very good stead. My ambition beyond coronavirus is absolutely to build back fairer. Because if we don't build back fairer, we certainly will not be building back better. And coronavirus has exposed, absolutely exposed, those deep underlying unfairnesses and inequalities that are there in Welsh society and which have been exacerbated during a decade of deliberate austerity. What we now need to see is a government of Westminster that is prepared as we come out of all of this, not to heap the responsibility for it on the shoulders of those on whom we've relied the most during the last 12 months. And yet, I fear very much that that is what we will see. And instead of inequalities being eroded, the Welsh Government will once again be faced with trying to do everything we can do to mitigate the impacts of a UK government whose actions simply add to, rather than address, the structural impacts that we have seen drawn to the surface during the pandemic.
First Minister, you previously said that you share my party's ambition of paying care workers fairly with a guaranteed minimum wage of £10 an hour, but that can only happen, you've said, if your party at Westminster succeeds in persuading the UK government to adopt such a policy. Surely we can't afford to outsource such a fundamental decision to a UK Tory government. I mean, they're never going to build back fairer, are they? 25 years ago, we used to talk about the devolution dividend as one of the core arguments for the creation of this institution, the Senedd. Isn't it time that that dividend was paid to this group of workers? And so will you commit to funding social care, First Minister, sufficiently so that all care workers can at least receive the real living wage as an embodiment of the new Wales we should endeavour to create as a positive legacy of this awful pandemic?
Well, first of all, let me say that the devolution dividend is there every day in the experience of Welsh citizens, and there in a way that directly addresses inequalities as well. People here in Wales who are in low pay don't pay for their prescriptions, but across the border they're paying nearly £9 for every item. There's no tax on sickness here in Wales, and that's a devolution dividend. In this Senedd term, we have created the most generous childcare offer anywhere in the United Kingdom, again, so that working families know that they can go to work and deal with and have at their disposal quality childcare for young people as they are in those formative years. We still have free breakfast in our primary schools, again, absolutely aimed at making sure that those children who came to school too hungry to learn have something in Wales that we know that will prevent that from happening. The devolution dividend is there every single day in the lives of Welsh families. And as for social care workers, of course it's the ambition of this government that our social care workers should be properly recognised and properly paid for the job they do. We were the first government in the United Kingdom to pay £500 to social care workers in recognition of the extraordinary job they have done during the pandemic. Now that the Chancellor's budget is out of the way, then my colleague Rebecca Evans with Julie Morgan and Vaughan Gethin are looking to see how we can use our budgets to continue to advance our agenda of recognising and rewarding social care workers for the vital job they do here in Wales.
Rwy'n y Ceidwadwyr Cymreig, Andrew R.T. Davies.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I identify myself with the comments of the other leaders here this afternoon in reflecting on the year's anniversary since the first COVID death in Wales. Who would have thought in 12 months later we would still tragically be seeing more deaths being reported from COVID and continuing to go through the restrictions that are placed on all our everyday lives. I'd also like to ask the First Minister, because as we've come out of the COVID crisis with the vaccine programme in full swing across the whole of the United Kingdom, on the continent of Europe, many leaders are now turning their back on the AstraZeneca vaccine and putting comments in the press that are deeply unhelpful to the rollout of the vaccine. You've used the rostrum here, or the lectern, should I say, to pass a message to the leaders on the continent of Europe when the Brexit discussions were in full flow. First Minister, what's your message to President Macron and Chancellor Merkel when they're talking negatively about the AstraZeneca vaccine? Because until we have society across the world vaccinated, it's going to be increasingly difficult for us to get back to our normal lives. And what impact have you had, what impact and assessment have you had made of the comments on the rollout of the vaccine here in Wales or the comments made in Europe?
Well, so my message is to people here in Wales on this important issue, and my message to people in Wales is very simple. The Oxford vaccine is safe. The anxieties that have been expressed about it elsewhere are not shared by the medicines regulator here in Wales. They are not shared by the World Health Organization. They're not shared by the European Medicines Regulatory Agency, and they are certainly not shared by our Chief Medical Officer and our scientific advisors. The Health Minister and I had an opportunity yesterday to test all this evidence directly with our Chief Medical Officer. And we came away from that absolutely strengthened in our understanding that the blood clots that are talked about in newspapers, there is no more risk of a blood clot for having the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine than there would be in the population at large at any time. Blood clots occur all the time in the population, and the vaccine is not going to increase your risk of that. So on the important point that Andrew R.T. Davies made, I don't want anybody in Wales who may be hesitant about the vaccine to become more hesitant because of the stories that they will have seen or heard. The vaccination programme in Wales goes from strength to strength. We broke records twice in this last week, on Friday and on Saturday, in the reported numbers of people who were vaccinated in one day. Over 40,000 people in one day reported on Saturday, an extraordinary figure, over 1% of the whole population of Wales coming forward for vaccination. That's what we need to see in the days and weeks ahead, and I know that that will be strongly supported by parties across this chamber, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have reinforced those messages again this afternoon.
Thank you, First Minister, and I do welcome those positive comments despite the negativity that are coming from other countries, and I hope that we can get back in those countries to a normal process of vaccination, because as I said, unless we all adhere to the vaccination programme, we will all suffer lockdown measures going forward, as we're seeing in countries across Europe at the moment. But I do want to bring you back to your own control plan, the coronavirus control plan, which you brought forward in December. And in particular, that plan was predicated on the Kent variant being the dominant virus, which you identified on the 21st of December. The Health Minister repeated this to me in January when I was asking for a roadmap out of lockdown, and in particular, gateways of opportunity to open up the economy and open up society. You also repeated the importance of the coronavirus control plan to my colleague Laura Ann Jones in February, yet it is my understanding that the coronavirus control plan has now been put to one side and is waiting an update. Why is it taking so long to update the coronavirus control plan, as it's been central to your thinking up until a few weeks ago? And can you, in the interest of transparency, there's all the updated guidelines that you're using when you're considering measures to unlock society as we go further into the spring and early summer?
Well, the control plan, the alert levels were absolutely key to the announcement that I was able to make on Friday of last week. A very clear set of milestones for our education system, for our personal lives and in the business community, explaining how we hope to take advantage of the work that we have done together to suppress the virus here in Wales, to have more children back in school, more opportunities for people to meet, more businesses able to reopen again. I set out a series of dates right up until the 12th of April and indicated the issues that will be under consideration in the review period beyond that, provided conditions allow. And all of that drew very heavily on the control plan. We are in the process of updating some of the metrics in it to take full account of new variants and risks that still exist, because while numbers in Wales are currently falling and the number of people in hospital is falling as well, none of us should turn our sight away from the risks that continue to be there. 3/4 of the countries of Europe reported rising coronavirus rates only last week. And here in Wales, we have some areas where numbers are not falling. So while the position is, for the moment, and hopefully continuingly, heading in the right direction, it won't continue to do so if we don't attend to all the risks that continue to be there. The updated coronavirus plan will make sure that we have a properly balanced assessment, both of everything that has been achieved, of the positive impact that vaccination will continue to provide, but also that we do not put at risk everything that's been achieved by not being constantly vigilant at the risks that this virus can still pose to us all and to the lives of people here in Wales.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. I am a little surprised at the importance you attached to the coronavirus control plan in last week's announcement, because the Health Minister did confirm that the plan as devised was not being adhered to in the consideration of the plans you announced on Friday. And that update was alluded to by the Deputy Minister in his interview on the Politics Show on Sunday, which we're still waiting for. Can you confirm when that new plan will be available for us all to consider what the matrix of the government are working to? And importantly, when it comes to a public inquiry, you've made comments recently that you do not believe that a public inquiry would be appropriate to start before the pandemic has come to its natural conclusion, if indeed it ever does come to its conclusion. And we've also learned from Carmarthenshire Council, for example, that twice as many people died in care homes in the second wave of the coronavirus outbreak. So it's really important that we do have an independent, thorough inquiry to look at all these aspects so that we can plan for the future, learn the safety measures we need to put in place to save lives going forward. I know we have an election on May the 6th, and we'll all be fighting to take the job that you have, and you will be fighting to retain that job. But it's important that members of the public understand exactly who occupies that chair, what they will do in commissioning such a public inquiry. From my point of view, I want to see a public inquiry as soon as possible, make progress, and rather than lose it in a wider UK public inquiry, have a Wales-specific public inquiry. Could you clarify your remarks so that we can understand exactly when you believe that a public inquiry should start, and that you agree that it should be a standalone Welsh public inquiry looking at the measures that Welsh Government have control over, rather than submerged into a wider UK inquiry?
Well, Llywydd, I believe that an inquiry will be a necessary and important part of the way that we learn the lessons of the extraordinary 12 months that we have lived through. I did not say yesterday that I thought it should wait until coronavirus was over. I said I thought it should wait until we are all confident that coronavirus is in the rearview mirror. So we will still be dealing with coronavirus and will be for some time to come. But when we are certain that we are moving out of it and we're not at risk of it re-emerging again, then there will be capacity in the system to do the thinking and the work of contributing to a public inquiry. I don't agree with him about a Welsh-only inquiry. I've lost count of the number of times he has urged on me a four-nation approach. And yet on this issue, he appears to think it is sensible to go it alone. A Wales-only inquiry would not be able to grapple with a long list of issues that will be fundamental to being able to draw the lessons from what has happened. It would not be able to look at issues of foreign travel and the importation of the virus into the United Kingdom. And yet the first cases we saw here in Wales were viruses that came from elsewhere in the world. It would not be able to deal with the decision making of Cobra and the way in which that has impacted on the course of the virus here in Wales. It would not be able to deal with the vaccination programme, because the vaccination programme relies heavily on the successful work of the UK government in securing supplies of the vaccine. It wouldn't be able to deal with the testing programme, because again, the testing programme, we rely on the Lighthouse labs for a good part of the testing programme here in Wales, and those labs and the decisions about them are made by the UK government. So I could go on. There is a very long list of things which are absolutely central to understanding the way in which coronavirus has impacted here in Wales. That will absolutely properly look at the decision-making of the Welsh Government as well. But trying to do it in isolation from the decisions that have been made across the United Kingdom and by other governments, as well as decisions that have been made jointly, it wouldn't even begin to tell the picture of what has happened in the last 12 months. It would not be worth it as an endeavour. On this matter, I agree with the advice he normally gives me, that a UK-wide inquiry in which the decision-making of all layers of government would be fundamental. That is the way to learn the lessons in a way that is right, proper and effective. And that's something which I am very committed to making sure happens.
Question 3, Caroline Jones.
Diolch, Dipro Llywydd. What action is the Welsh Government taking to combat the rise of dog thefts in Wales?
Thank the member for the question. So, while dog theft is not a devolved matter, officials across the UK are working together to develop proposals to tackle pet theft. The Welsh Government will act with others to ensure any such proposals have an effective impact here in Wales.
Thank you, First Minister. For many people, their dog is not just a pet, they are a family member. And to have that family member violently ripped from you so someone can profit is unimaginable to me. And I'm sure every person with an ounce of compassion feels that way. I cannot imagine the heartache those people are going through. So while I accept, First Minister, that crime and sentencing matters are reserved to the UK government, we can take action to make these crimes more difficult to perpetrate. First Minister, will you consider imposing tougher restrictions on third-party sales of pets to ensure that not only stringent animal welfare standards are met, but to cut off the black market in animal sales? Diolch.
So thank Caroline Jones. I share her view of the impact that dog thefts have on families where the care of an animal is absolutely part of what that family revolves around. I vividly remember, with an early conversation with a food bank that I visited about the importance of being able to provide food for animals as part of the service that they provided for those families who relied upon the companionship of the dog that they spend a lot of their time, a lot of their lives with. So to have a dog stolen will be devastating for so many families. And I'm very pleased to be able to say, in relation to that supplementary question, that next week the Welsh Government will bring forward for debate on the 23rd of March Lucy's Law proposals, as they are sometimes called, to ban third-party sales of pets here in Wales. Look forward to that debate, and I'm sure to support from members for that action in many parts of the chamber.
Jack Sargent.
Diolch, Deputy Llawydd. First Minister, as a dog lover, I know that your dog is often your best friend, and has been said already this afternoon, is very much a family member. Now, it is deeply disturbing to know that criminals are targeting dogs and other pets to steal. These people are an absolute disgrace, an absolute disgrace. First Minister, what conversations have the Welsh Government ministers had with the police and the Home Office to ensure these criminals are brought to justice? And what conversations have you had about the impact of the UK Conservative police cuts and their failure to deliver on the promised 62 extra police officers in Deeside?
So I thank Jack Sargent for that. We've been just discussing the pandemic impact here in Wales, and this question is connected to it as well. We know that in the conditions of having to work from home and stay at home, many families have acquired pets, and that means that the opportunity for criminal action has arisen, because the prices of dogs has risen very fast over the last 12 months, and it is disgraceful. I agree absolutely with Jack Sargent that people should seek to exploit people's vulnerabilities in that way. We have conversations, of course, with our police and crime commissioners and police forces. Very good to see that Dyfed Powys Police has recently appointed a chief inspector to head their task force on this matter. But our police forces are stretched in all directions. Policing the pandemic and dealing with volumes of crime that have not abated in many ways during it create enormous pressures for them. And those pressures are exacerbated by a decade of cuts, a decade of Tory cuts in police forces. Numbers reduced year after year after year. Now, the Welsh Government stepped in, as Jack Sargent will know, and his father was very much part of this, stepped in to fund 500 PCSOs here in Wales to allow our local forces to have more people on the ground in communities able to deal with issues like dog theft and the impact that that has on families. Now, I know that the Conservative Party has committed itself to ensure that were they to have any part to play in the next Senedd government, that no funding would be provided for non-devolved matters. Well, that's the end of 500 police support officers in Wales, because we have put our money in to protect communities where the Conservative government has failed. And if we're returned to government after the 6th of May, then people in Wales can know that those beat officers, the people who they meet day in, day out in their communities, they will be safe with the Labour government, even while the Tories here in Wales are determined to defund them.
Question 4, Alan Davis.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. What assessment has the First Minister made of the proposed funding allocations to Wales resulting from the UK Government's Shared Prosperity Fund?
Deputy Llywydd, our assessment is clear. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund fails to honour repeated public commitments made by the UK Government and Leave campaigners in Wales that exiting the European Union would mean not a penny less and no devolved powers lost to Wales.
Thank you, First Minister. We have heard much but seen little of either the Shared Prosperity Fund or the Levelling Up Fund, both of which are becoming more and more like a publicly funded Conservative election fund than a serious attempt to share the prosperity of the United Kingdom. First Minister, do you share my concern that Wales will lose out, that investment funding in Wales will be cut, and that support for Welsh communities recovering from COVID will be cut by a UK Tory government that has, over the last year, delivered more funds to its friends and donors than it has invested to sustain the Welsh economy? Therefore, do you agree with me that we can only trust the Welsh government to deliver for Wales and not a Tory UK government that only looks at us with disdain from afar?
Well, so those cuts are already happening. Those cuts are guaranteed now by the way the UK government has published its plans for the Levelling Up Fund, so-called, and for the Shared Prosperity Fund. Wales will miss out on millions and millions and millions of pounds. And communities like Blaenau Gwent will be at the sharp end of that. Communities of which this Conservative government knows little and cares less. And in those practical decisions, we are going to see, instead of the 7-year funding that we had under structural funds, instead of a partnership approach with players here in Wales at that local level determining how that money should be spent, we are going to see a random, divisive, bureaucratic and wasteful set of arrangements imposed upon us. And I very much share the anxieties that Alan Davis expressed in his opening supplementary question. We are going to be in the hands of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, a ministry of which the House of Commons Public Affairs Accounts Committee said in July 2019 of the local enterprise funds in England, that despite spending £12 billion, that ministry had no understanding of what impact that spending had on local economic growth. The same committee, commenting on the Towns Fund, decisions made by the Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick, that he had risked the civil service's reputation for integrity and impartiality, that he had acted in ways that fueled accusations of political bias, when he plucked a scheme that was 563rd on the list of 541 ranked by his civil servants and decided to fund it. It's little wonder that the conclusions were drawn, that decision was driven by those narrow partisan and politically motivated ways of conducting business. Now Wales will be at the same mercy of a UK government making decisions in Whitehall, bypassing people here in Wales, we will look every day at the way that those decisions are made to make sure that pork barrel politics of the sort we see by this Tory government in Whitehall, that we're not polluted by it here in Wales.
Mark Isherwood.
Well, speaking in the House of Commons last month, the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Wales said the amount of money that's going to be spent in Wales when the Shared Prosperity Fund comes in will be identical to or higher than the amount of money spent in Wales that came from the European Union, and that the UK will continue to engage with the Welsh Government as they develop the fund's investment framework for publication. Speaking in the joint meeting of the Senedd Finance and External Affairs Committees last week, the Secretary of State for Wales said the funding being made available to Wales, underpinned by the not a penny less guarantee, will provide opportunities for Wales to do even better than it has previously done in terms of funding streams, and that they're asking local authorities to join with stakeholders, their MSs, Welsh Government officials, and with MPs to come up with really innovative ideas, either as individual authorities or joint with other authorities, and bid for the money available, where the lessons learned from that this year will form the basis of the actual Shared Prosperity Fund, which is a much larger packet of money from the end of 2021 onwards. How will you engage with that and avoid, as you say, we must narrow partisan and politically motivated approaches?
Well, however, the fact that nonsense is spoken on the floor of the House of Commons doesn't make it any less nonsensical. And it is plainly nonsensical. Next year, the Community Renewal Fund, the latest rebadging of the Shared Prosperity Fund, is worth £220 million for the whole of the United Kingdom. Wales alone had £375 million in structural funds. And we're not guaranteed, let's use that word, we are not guaranteed a single penny of it. It is a UK fund on a bidding basis. There is no money in it for Wales that says Wales on it at all. You'll be able to bid, and then a Tory minister in Whitehall will make decisions against the track record that I just set out for members here. In what possible sense could anybody defend that as a way of treating Wales? We are being cheated out of money. We are being stolen where it comes to our powers. And the unfolding record of the UK government in Westminster shortchanges Wales every single day.
Question 5, yw'r. Davies.
Diolch, Llywedd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the effectiveness of NHS Wales's Test, Trace and Protect service?
So the Test, Trace, Protect is an essential mechanism to detect, control, and protect people from the spread of the virus. The public service partnership approach that we have taken in Wales has safeguarded public funds, used them with probity and integrity, and has efficiently delivered a highly effective system for Wales.
First Minister, thank you for that answer. And the reason I raise this question is because, shockingly, it was reported last week, and I quote, "There is no evidence to show that the UK Conservative government's multi-billion-pound test and trace programme to combat COVID-19 in England contributed to a reduction in coronavirus infection levels. But worse still, First Minister, the chair of the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee said the enormous amount spent on this scheme leaves the impression that the public purse has been used like a cash pot, totaling £37 billion over 2 years." Now, this is in stark contrast to NHS Wales's Test, Trace and Protect service, which, as of the end of February, I understand had reached 99.6% of positive cases were eligible, together with 95% of their close contacts. So would you agree with me, First Minister, that it is definitely better to invest taxpayers' hard-earned money into tried and tested public services who have a strong track record of delivery, and that the £37 billion wasted by the UK government frankly makes their offer of a below-inflation 1% pay rise to nurses even more darn insulting?
Well, Llywydd, Hugh Davis is right. The £37 billion figure is eye-watering. £6 billion handed out in contracts by direct award with no competition for those contracts at all. We have made provision in our budget for next year to run our highly successful TTP system up until the end of September, and we've needed to put £60 million aside in order to do that. £60 million the cost here in Wales. The eye-watering sums criticised in that Public Accounts Committee report across the border. We've done it, as the member knows, because we have relied upon the public service. No £1,100 a day consultants here in Wales. No companies running the service in order to extract a private profit. We've relied on public service and public servants, and it's they who have delivered the outstandingly successful system we have. And I agree with him. You know, I go back to the answer I gave earlier about the way in which we can see the Conservative government at Westminster manoeuvring to make sure that the consequences of this pandemic are heaped onto the shoulders of those least able to bear them. And when we say that it is our public service and public servants who have got us through this crisis in the way that our TTP system demonstrates, those people are to have no increase at all next year. That's their reward from the UK government. This government and a Labour government at the UK level too would have a very, very different set of priorities. And I believe that those priorities are shared by people here in Wales.
Angela Burns.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Nice try to the previous speaker for sort of general, doing the evil Tory government in Westminster down. And First Minister, I did hear your response about private versus public. But of course, we all know it was the privately employed Kate Bingham who actually very, very successfully protected the United Kingdom, including Wales, on the vaccines by buying, investing and supporting all of those amazing scientists. So, let's hear it for the private sector as well. And when you talk about having a highly effective test, trace and protect system for Wales, that's exactly what I want. But let's be clear, the World Health Organization says that a successful contact tracing system is marked by being able to trace 80% of contacts within 3 days. Your test, trace and protect system reaches 90% of contacts, well done, but within 9 days after that initial contact. There's a lot of spreading within that 9-day window. Significantly more than the World Health Authority's recommendation. It should be 3 days. So can you please tell us what actions that you will be taking to try to cut that lag from 9 days to the WHO's recommended 3 days in order to ensure that here in Wales we have the most effective test, trace and protect system?
Although I don't recognise the 9-day figure at all, but the member will be very pleased to know, given her concerns, that 90% of close contacts last week were reached within 24 hours, and that 93% of index cases were reached within 24 hours. So where the 9 days comes from, I do not know. But last week, those were the figures that were reported. So that's a good deal better than the 3 days that the WHO has identified, and I think demonstrates once again the success of the system we have here in Wales.
Mr. Chwech, Helen Mary Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on access to primary care service in the Mid and West region during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank the member for that, Llywydd. Access to primary care services has changed rapidly across Wales over the past year. Services have had to adapt so that patients can access primary care in a safe and effective manner. Many are using digital technology to do so.
I'm grateful to the First Minister for his answer. And of course, health boards have had to make changes in the provision of primary care. One instance in my region is that the surgery in the village of Trimsaran has had to be temporarily closed so that is kept as a space that can be used for treating COVID patients if necessary. Now, the community has accepted this, but they are concerned, both in the immediate situation because they have to travel now to Kidwelly, and at the same time, the bus services have been cut because of COVID. A perfect storm, but perhaps unavoidable. But there is a suspicion that the health board may use this, the COVID crisis, to permanently close that surgery. Now, obviously, I think we'd want to congratulate the health board on how they've handled the crisis, and these operational matters are not matters for the First Minister. But can I ask the First Minister today if he can reassure my constituents in Trimsaran that the Welsh Government does not expect any changes to primary care services that have been made because of the COVID crisis to be extended beyond the pandemic without proper assessment and consultation?
Well, let me just emphasise the last part of what the members said, because on that basis, then I could sign up to what she just said, because I was about to say to her before she made that final point. Of course, many of the changes that have happened during the pandemic, we will want to see them continue afterwards, but they need to be properly consulted upon, and they need to be properly understood. But the fact that we have thousands of video consultations happening every day, and people no longer having to travel inconvenient distances and do things that were difficult for them to do, we want to preserve those things as well. The specific point that Helen Mary Jones makes points to a dilemma. I've been asked a number of times on the floor of the Senedd to think about having COVID-only hospitals and therefore other hospitals that deal with all the non-COVID things. But when you do that, it's inevitable, as you see in Trimsaran, that the things you would normally go to a hospital for will no longer be available to you, and you have to travel an even longer distance to find them. So dealing with the pandemic and trying to keep people safe and trying to make sure that people who need the health service for non-COVID reasons don't run the risk of contracting the disease is genuinely challenging. And it's been felt in our primary care as well as in our hospital services. As we move beyond the pandemic, I am very keen that we learn the positive lessons. This astonishing rate of change that the health service has managed to accommodate over the last 12 months. But of course, those are things that need to be done in consultation with local populations and to make sure that patients are taken on that journey.
Cwestiwn 7, Paul Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd. What steps has the Welsh Government taken to support the Pembrokeshire economy throughout the COVID-19 pandemic?
With over 4,000 businesses in Pembrokeshire have received more than £91 million in grants since the start of the pandemic in order to support that local economy.
Thank you for that response, First Minister. Now, the Welsh Government's announcement on Friday was met with particular frustration from non-essential local businesses in Pembrokeshire, some of whom had planned for potential reopening this week and incurred costs to do so. You previously suggested that businesses selling non-essential products should look to reopen from next Monday, and now that's been put back until April the 12th. In light of this change in direction from the Welsh Government, can you confirm exactly what scientific evidence was used to continue to prohibit the reopening of non-essential retail outlets until the 12th of April? And can you confirm that the Welsh Government will recoup the costs that have been made by businesses so that at the very least those businesses are not further disadvantaged financially as a result of the delay in reopening non-essential retail outlets?
Well, I've taken the precaution of bringing with me what I actually said on the 19th of February when looking forward to the current 3-week review. It's not what Mr. Davies has suggested at all. So let's look at what was actually said. Here it is. I said, we will then look, and I was talking about this 3 weeks, at whether So whether we can start to reopen some non-essential retail. That's what I said, that we would consider whether we could begin to reopen some non-essential retail. And actually, Llywydd, that is exactly what we have done and is exactly what we will do. Because from the 22nd of March, those shops that are already open selling essential goods will be able to sell the full range of goods that they would normally have on offer, and that will include all those non-essential items as well. It is safe to do that because those shops are already open. They already comply with the strengthened regulations that we put on the statute book here in Wales in January to take account of the Kent variant. Other non-essential retailers now know that on the 12th of April, the same day as in England, remember that four-nation approach that the Conservative Party was keen to advocate? On the same day as in England, all other non-essential retail in Wales will reopen. In the meantime, the sector will be supported by £150 million of additional assistance that I was also able to announce last Friday to take account of the fact that, of course, those businesses would rather be open. They'd rather be opening, they'd rather be trading than waiting for a grant from the Welsh Government. I completely understand that. And as soon as it is safe to do so, as soon as they are able to take account of the next few weeks to make themselves safe, then on the 12th of April, they will all be able to reopen as well.
Ac yn ola, cwestiwn 8, Laura Jones.
What action is the Welsh Government taking to improve transport in South East Wales?
Llywydd, we are already taking forward many of the suggestions made by the Burns Commission. Its ambitious set of recommendations will lead to significant transport improvements for the region. The interim report of the Hendy Review highlights the case for improvements to the South Wales main line as proposed by the Commission.
Thank you. First Minister, last week, in response to my question on Newport Council's support for a referendum for an M4 relief road, the Minister for Housing and Local Government said, if there is a call for a local referendum, then we're certainly happy to work with Newport Council to see how that might be accomplished. Julie James then went on to say she was all in favour of local people having a large say in what happens in their region or area. You've told us today how important local democracy is to you, First Minister. So therefore, would you hold a referendum on an M4 relief road as called for by Newport Council?
Sorry, I don't have anything to add to what my colleague has already told the member on that matter. I'm very glad, though, to hear her conversion to local decision-making. She will feel as aggrieved as I do, therefore, ministers in her government in London continually pretend that they have powers to make decisions in relation to an M4 relief road. They don't. Those decisions are properly made here, and the member's conversion to that is very welcome.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog. Yr eitem nesaf felly yw'r cwestiynau'r Cwnselyr Cyffredinol yn rhinwedd ei gyfrifoldebau fel swyddog cyfreithiol, ac mae'r cwestiwn cyntaf,